Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Gregor Berkowitz, and this is Colin Angle from iRobot. Hopefully we can keep you awake after lunch with an interesting conversation about robots and robotics. I think maybe to start, what I want to do is give some context, which is I think Sony and Honda have been making pretty interesting and pretty compelling demonstrations of humanoid robotics for some time, and I think that we all agree they're pretty cool. Mm-hmm. That said, iRobot has managed to sell 1.5 million Rumbas in the past 4 years. And so, from my perspective, that's a pretty substantial rollout of robotics into a sort of mainstream culture. What's interesting is what's different about your approach to robotics and how that enables those kind of opportunities.
Well, if you look at where robots came from, you had Hollywood taught us and the science fiction writers taught us that robots were these humanoid things that walked around and took a vacuum cleaner out of the closet and pushed them around. And it led to this perception that in order for machines to meet our physical needs, they had to look like us. And addressing that challenge of actually creating a humanoid is a fantastically fun and very impressive adventure. It just happens to be wildly impractical and useless for everything other than entertainment purposes. So what we've seen and what's going on in Asia is a huge fascination with humanoid robots, and I'm happy that they're doing that. They're not more directly competing with me, but it's not going to lead anywhere particularly interesting, because what they've created are technologically wildly expensive marvels. And Moore's law isn't going to help. They already have, the cost of the computers to run these things is already a small, tiny percentage of the overall cost of these robots. It's really the mechanical complexity of a dynamically balancing humanoid robot with legs and arms and an expressive face that's the challenge. So what we've done at iRobot is hopefully steered the industry toward making practical things. Let's instead deconstruct the challenge that we're trying to address with a robot and come up with a way that a machine can effectively perform that task and in a cost-effective fashion. So thus, the Roomba cleans and vacuums your floor in a way that's entirely different than you would.
So in the previous talk, they talked about innovation. Mm-hmm. So one of the interesting things in researching this before this conversation was understanding how did you came about the idea of the Roomba and making a household vacuum cleaning robot?
Well, the idea was the easy part. People, thanks to Rosie the robot in 1962 and the Jetsons, everyone expects robots to clean your floor. But actually reducing it to reality was a very, very different mission. In fact, the road to innovation at iRobot, as far as the Roomba goes, was sort of passed through some very unusual stages. First, we were building toys with Hasbro, and we were learning all about mass manufacturing. We were building industrial cleaning machines for tens of thousands of dollars in conjunction with Johnson Wax. And it just so happened that through this circuitous path, we had a company that knew about mass manufacturing, industrial cleaning, robotics. It happened during the psychotic, crack-filled times of the dot-com era, so we were fundable. And so we had the resources. Yeah. Technology. So we had the resources to actually try to play this game, and ultimately ended up with this new class of robots, and said if you can focus on cost from the first day and focus on the end use, a new level of sophistication of appliances is possible, and we're trying to move that forth, and we're seeing some other companies follow our leads.
one of the interesting things that I thought about in preparing for this was that a lot of consumer products come into being when there's not, when the device itself can be very simple and not have to filter on too much requirement. Do you think, how do you see that in the Roomba and how it delivers on the opportunity or delivers on what is required for the consumer?
Well, it's, I would be hard-pressed to suggest Roomba is a simple device. It has, as far as parts count and lines of code and well over 10 or 12 different sensors, and yet it has to be able to take a 10-foot drop onto unfriendly drop into concrete and survive, and so and work in millions of different households. So I don't think Roomba is appropriately described as a simple machine, but it's certainly much simpler than some people have imagined what the practical robot of the future is going to look like. And so we had to have some amount of the reductionist thinking and boiling it down to the essence of what was required in order to create the device.
And so how do you add functionality or add opportunity to the...
Well, we have an open interface. And we had a reference to Make Magazine, where one of the writers of Make Magazine turned it into a game of Frogger, and has done some very strange things. But we're starting to see a mass-manufactured robot platform, which has a lot of sensing and a lot of capability, be turned and used for unusual and wonderful new applications that we have nothing to do with. And I think that the industry is going to benefit from the enabled creativity. We talked about innovation in the last little chat, and I think creativity and innovation happens more easily when it's seeded, when there's the idea of, look, there's an installed base of 1.5 million Roombas, and all of them have a serial port. Kind of like once there was a sufficiently large installed base of PCs, you could hang a shingle, write some software, and actually earn a living selling applications that would run on this installed base of machines. Well, with the Roomba and new products were coming out, we're trying to do the same thing. We are going to create an installed base and an infrastructure of hopefully small, creative, wonderful entrepreneurs is going to help extend.
And is there an environment where people can share those innovations between them?
Yes, we have we're facilitating it on our own website. We have a Roomba developer section of our website, plus there's a lot of other user groups, and again, this Philip and Make is doing some work as well. So communities are forming both with our involvement and on an ad hoc basis.
So where does this go in the future? What are the opportunities for the future for robotics, for robots?
Well, the future, it's a frighteningly large potential, and it is a potential, but there are real driving factors that society is having to deal with. Two of these drivers that iRobot is particularly interested in is the aging demographic. We have a situation today where the assisted living facilities and elder care homes are inadequate to address the needs of our elderly. And the vector is going down. Nurses' average age is around 50 years old. They're chronically understaffed, and things are getting worse. So how are we going to meet the challenge when the number of people over the age of 65 doubles in the next 10, 15 years? And besides, those people don't actually want to go to nursing homes in the first place. And I think robots have an opportunity to play a role in helping address this conflict between our decreasing ability to care for our elderly and our increasing numbers. And that's by creating technologies that allow people to live independently for longer and longer periods of time. And the nice thing about this challenge is you don't have to solve the entire problem at once. If you can help someone a small percentage of the elderly live independently for one more year, you've created an opportunity worth at least tens of millions, and if not hundreds of millions of dollars of value. And then the other very large driver that's currently moving the robot industry is the need for military transformation. Our current armed forces is over-deployed, overextended, and basically operating at a unsustainable rate. I think we have one of our board of directors is a former Undersecretary of Defense, and he, at our last board meeting, said, you know, every $100 billion counts, in referring to the military. And he sort of scratched and said, okay. And, you know, it says, no, really, when we stop having $100 billion supplementals, there's actually going to be an issue that needs some very serious attention in the military. And so the challenge is this nation-building new mission that we have given our military is an incredibly labor-intensive, dangerous, expensive new mission. And our military is ill-equipped to do this on a sustainable fashion. They need better tools. They need, basically, robots. And we've been at the forefront of getting robots over there. We have 300 robots in Baghdad today doing a variety of missions. Right now it's primarily EOD, but we're starting to do missions beyond that, helping in building clearance and other types of security detail. And I think that we're just at the tip of the iceberg. And so that's going to be a great driver for robots. And none of these robots are going to look like humans. The energy crisis is also going to drive robots. The $70 a barrel oil is going to open up opportunities to use robotic technology to explore deep water oil and to re-enter current wells and stimulate production.
So isn't it a funny idea that at some future time we could have robots fighting robots? And
Well, that would be a conflict between two wealthy nations, perhaps. But I think that certainly is possible.
And how much of the robots you're deploying in the military, how much are they autonomous vehicles, or how much are they really telepresence? And how is the perception or the way people perceive the robots different because of?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you asked two questions. The way they're used in the military today is as telepresence devices. There's always a person in the loop controlling the robot, and typically it's one person for one robot, although that won't always be the case. But human in the loop. But the bond between operator and robot is, can be incredibly intense. We get various anecdotal stories coming back from Baghdad. There was a robot which was named Scooby-Doo, which was blown up by an IED, improvised explosive device. It came back. Its operator had him in a box, and he was actually crying as he brought it back to the repair facility, hoping that we could put Scooby-Doo back together for him. And he had gone on something like 35 missions and defused bombs. And really, what the person was saying, please fix Scooby because he saved my life. And the transference of emotions, just like it was a comrade being brought back to the medical facility. So the bonds between these mobile devices and people is strikingly strong, and perhaps not something that we would have predicted when we started.
So is it the personification of technology that makes it a robot?
Well, the question of what is a robot is something that I frequently wrestle with and try to answer. And I think I have two answers, and they overlap. The one is the geek answer, yeah. And that's a robot is a mobile device that perceives its environment, thinks about what it sees, and performs physical action based on what it thinks. And then the emotional response is a robot is something you personify. And if you have both of these factors, then I think that I would call it a robot, as opposed to something that might use robotic technology like a bread machine or a dishwasher.
And do you think the personification of the robots will allow interesting applications or allow people to be comfortable with using the technologies in ways they might not be comfortable with otherwise?
I think it's unavoidably a very powerful force that I don't know whether ultimately it's useful or an impediment, but it is certainly powerful. We have customer service calls where someone's Roomba has broken, and you just say, well, we'll send it back. No. I'm not going to send you Rosie. You're going to send me somebody else, and it's going to have a different personality. And they're like, no, it's the same code. It looks the same. And these are strange relationships that are creating. And yet, on the plus side, people want it to work. And so as any technology in its infancy, sometimes robots are challenged, and the relationship between the person and the robot can lead to someone says, oh, it got stuck. I'll move the table so it doesn't get stuck next time. And you get some benefit from the closeness of the interaction.
I think it's an opportunity in that not too many people name their computers and have that kind of relationship with their computers or their cell phone or the other kind of technologies we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. So how does that enable robotics or robots to enter the home or provide new services or maybe be more invasive in people's lives than maybe otherwise they would be comfortable with?
Well, there's definitely, it seems like robots can jack into this interaction metaphor that we are perhaps biologically, but certainly trained to be good at. You and I are conversing. I'm looking at your face. I'm judging your expressions, whether you're interested or not, what have you. And we're having a conversation. Well, it's hard to do that with your cell phone. It's hard to do that with your dishwasher. But you can do it with your robots. And there's been some talk on various forums so far about how do we simplify technology? How do we make my phone have one function? How do I make my smart home have an interface that I can better understand? And perhaps the answer is through the use of human interaction robots. Because the idea of having a smart home with cameras everywhere that monitor where I am, that track me is very invasive. And it's, it reeks of 1984, it reeks of Big Brother. But a robot can avoid all that and yet provide all of the same benefit. Meaning that if the robot is with me and I'm talking to it or interacting with it, it can see me, it can understand what I'm asking of it, and then it can go forth and make the right sorts of things happen. But if it's not with me, either shut down with its face, looking at its stomach or off in its own room or closet, then I have my privacy. And I think this may be a very important future application.
Don't the robotics, though, have the same sort of one-button challenge that the rest of technology has? Well,
Roomba has one button. You hit clean.
Mm-hmm.
And it works. And Scuba has one button. I mean, I think that UIs, the challenge of a good UI is the challenge of a good UI. And technology done for the good simplifies simplifies the conveyance of my will to the device. And you can say, well, okay, Roomba has one button because it only does one thing.
Cell phones were easy to use when they were just telephones.
Cell phones were, well, yes, but if I imagine my home robot and I could talk to it, and it has some context as to where we are in the home, has some context about what time it is, it has some context about looking at my face, perhaps some notion of the stress in my voice, and certainly on top of that, ultimately we'll get decent voice recognition. I think I'll be able to convey comfortably my will to my robot, and then once my will is in the digital domain, the complexity can be taken care of and the right things can happen.
And do you think that because of the persona, there's some willingness to accept that things don't quite happen the way people expect?
That's an interesting point, and I think kind of like the example with the personification of the simpler robots we've described, you'll get some amount of patience as long as the persona is one that doesn't annoy you, or as long as you have developed a relationship with this device and recognize its utility in your life. I mean, we put up with annoying people if they, on the greater scheme of things, have help us more than the other way.
So, I mean, one thing that comes up for me is what the sort of ethical issues or ethical challenges there might be in people-robot interactions. And if there are ethical issues, what are those ethical issues? What are those ethical challenges we're going to see as they begin to be more involved in our lives?
Well, I think I'm not sure to what extent we're going to have ethical issues. It's certainly going to be strange to have interactions and relationships with robots as opposed to purely other human beings. I think that making sure that robots are there to help and robots are safe are going to be critically important. I suppose that's in the domain of ethics. And we don't we don't create Cylons that come and try to wipe us out. That would be viewed as a bad idea. But I mean, I think this...
Will we regard people as strange if they prefer to spend their time with a robot than with other people?
I think that, well, we don't consider people all that strange if they spend 80 hours a week in Second Life or in one of these massively on-player games. So I think that having a robot as your friend is not weirder than that. Although, watching you and the robot playing catch in the front yard might be little... I guess probably people would think that's at least more athletic and getting the kid out of the house. And so maybe that would be a good thing. There's definitely a lot of lonely people. There's definitely a lot of desire for companionship. And occasionally you see products like the Furby, which was a $39 small robot thing. They sold 40 million of these, almost half of them to adults for adult use. So there's definitely a demand for some kind of companionship in mechanical form if that's the best people can get. And I think that ultimately, while iRobot's not engaged in that, we'll see some startup companies that successfully create robot pets and robot companions.
How, maybe that's already happened with the Tamagotchi.
Well, Tamagotchi, the Robo Sapien last year, the
Ugobi.
Ugobi is another example. And certainly with Robo Sapiens and Furby, we've had some substantial successes.
Someone was talking to me about Roomba and their cat playing while I was
it's a great cat toy.
Yeah.
Yeah. People put laser pointers and little ribbons on the back of them, and the cats find this is to be good entertainment. Perhaps people can chase them around too. I don't know.
So, taking this idea of human and robot interaction, do you think there's sort of a way to sort of lead social interaction by building these robots? I mean, when we begin to have robots taking care of elderly, what does that mean? And are we patching a social issue, or can we make somehow actively make them solve the real social problems that are causing the sort of need for companionship?
Well, I think a robot, one interesting application of a robot is to use it as a physical avatar to actually facilitate interaction which could not otherwise happen because of distance. The physical avatar would be a robot that, for example, might be back home with my daughter, and I could go to my computer, pull up its web page, see what the robot saw, hear what the robot hears, and when I speak, my voice comes out the robot, and I can drive it around and so forth. And so that I could project myself physically from San Diego back to Boston and play with my daughter and give her more of the time that, based on my my current schedule, the fact I'm here talking with you in San Diego, can't do. So there's certainly opportunities for robots to help decrease social isolation. And one of the biggest challenges for the elderly is, in fact, social isolation. And perhaps if they had a robot, they could get more visits, not just from their doctors and nurses, but friends who are distant and can't visit them as frequently as they'd like. And I think that would be very warmly received.
So maybe connecting them as the end point or the end device in that broad pipe that we've talked about or heard
Sure.
talked about.
All this gigabytes of bandwidth, we need stuff to do with it. Well, here's a good idea.
These robots to communicate over that broad.
When the robots start talking to each other because they feel lonely, that might be not so good.
What about other areas of robotics? I think we've been talking about sort of robots in the sense of physical instantiated things. What about robots in other spaces, virtual robots or robots in terms of cars, and they're beginning to take on sort of personalities of robotics?
Well, I think that cars is interesting because there's two aspects of the car. If it's a utilitarian purpose, then certainly the technology is starting to exist where that car could drive itself. We have a device that a car you can get into. It's a utility vehicle. You drive it from point A to point B. You get out. You push a button. It retraces the steps and can serve as a logistical resupply vehicle. And of course, Stanford with the Stanley vehicle at the Grand Challenge is a new Grand Challenge to drive in traffic. The technology is getting there, so I can imagine a day in the not too distant future where you have an option of driving or not driving. But on the other side, the car is a very emotionally fun thing to do, and people are going to give it up reluctantly. And so I think that our mission is not to make life less fun. And so I think there are always going to be a place in the world for manually driven vehicles, and maybe they can be augmented and made more fun through robotic technology. But cars, I don't think there will always be some non-robot cars. So
Maybe with that, maybe I can open up to
Sure.
questions from the audience.
How much of the sales appeal of Roomba is due to its being cool and almost interactive versus being a good vacuum cleaner? And how much thought did you put into making it cool as opposed to being a good vacuum cleaner?
I would tell you honestly that almost 99% of Roomba is about vacuuming. In fact, we went to great lengths not to make it cute, because we were terrified people would think of it as a toy and not treat it as a serious appliance. And so the efficacy of the robot was paramount. And despite this, you got this massive personification of what it was. And people who are, again, we would get returns occasionally and find robots with immaculate paint jobs and eyeballs and decorations on it as a result of their love affair with their personification of the device. So it's really about cleaning and trying to be our best attempt at making a practical robot.
George Lucas, a long time ago, gave us the vision of R2-D2 and C-3PO, where you had the intermediate robot that performed the human interaction function that you described. Do you think that's an accurate portrayal of the way things are going to go?
Well, I know how to build R2-D2. I don't know how to build C-3PO at any finite cost. But I think the idea of creating a robot that has features that people key upon, arms, face, and so forth, is an important aspect of making sure that you can convey your will and have the robot convey its will back to you in as high bandwidth a fashion as possible.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.